The only reason why most of them is in it is just for the desire, love of it. You gotta love this kind of business to stay in it, because it's not easy.
Just like the moon, just like the sunshine. It was so easy to see where
My father was still working at the time when the nets was introduced, and he purchased a net from the trawl makers that were making nets at that time, and he was always working on the nets that he had, because he wasn't satisfied the way they were catching and the way they were tearing up. You know, they were very weak the way they were designed at that time. So he redesigned the Biloxi style net, was known as the Biloxi style setback net. He would redesign it by putting larger jibs in it and adding more netting. By doing this, he made the net stronger, because the nets that was introduced first was made so skimpy, and when they put them overboard, especially in deep water, and they got weight in them, they would bust up, they would tear, because, you know, they didn't have enough body to them to withstand the pressure of the water and the weight that they had in these nets. So my father took them, and with the idea he had about how a net should be made, that he started making them his way. And it continued on like that. It continued for years. And he used to outcatch all the fishermen he was working with at that time. And finally, they got together, the fishermen. He said, well, let's get together and see if Mr. Marco would make us a net like he's got. So they come to my father's house and ask him if he would make them a net like him. He said, well, I can't do it, because I'm working. So, okay, that went on. And he told me, he said, well, maybe after the season's over with, this was the early part of 1937. And the shrimp season didn't start till August. This was the first part of the year. You know, shrimping was over with. Dredging oysters was doing at that time. But he said, after the shrimp season's over with, I'll make y'all a net. So they got to thinking, and said, my God, the shrimp season's going to start in August, and it finishes around December. Them days, it's not shrimping around the clock like they're doing now. You couldn't go no more after December. It was cut off. You had to wait till August again. So they all got together, and they had a meeting, all the best fishermen, and they said, let's go to Mr. Glavin and tell him that if he would get in the trawl business, we would all patronize him and come buy our nets from him. So he took their advice.
My first job in the way of net making was at Jacksonville Fisherman Supply when I was about 5 years old. I was paid 50 cents a day to fill net needles and sweep out the net shop.
I first started trying to learn how to knit a net when I was about 9 or 10 years old. My godfather, my grandfather, my uncles, they all worked out on a boat, and I always wanted to go with them when they would leave. It was always this romantic, fun thing that they were doing, and I was a little kid, a little boy, and I always wanted to go with them, be out on the water, but I never got to go. I was always stuck home, and I just hated it. So I would get, but they would leave all these things around, laying around, and I would play with them. These were like toys for me. I just enjoyed it, and I would piddle and play with it, and I would pretend like I knew what I was doing, and of course they would come home and they would just be this wad of stuff laying around. And so eventually my godfather had mercy on me.
I started messing with nets when I was a young kid, probably about 7 years old. This right here was actually the first job. Messing with nets would be to fill the needles, you know, and this needles what we use to repair the nets with, or to actually sew the nets. And I actually have a daughter who's 6 years old, and this is what she does for me too, you know. So it's kind of carrying on the tradition of repairing our own nets and stuff like this.
My dad, my grandpa did, my step-grandfather, and they did it all my life. Since I was about 2 years old, I was around it. But mainly about 5 years old when I really started to learn how. I didn't really make a net back then, but I started. And I did it all for the own, just played with it. But I didn't get started about maybe 30 years ago when I made that one.
Eventually, between 1947 and 51, he taught me how a net should be made. So in 1951, he appointed me general manager and director of Glav & Trawl Manufacturing Company. And at that time, I inherited 8 workers. And all these workers was in their 70s, late 70s, some of them was in their 80s. And they didn't like the idea that I was only 19 years old when he appointed me the general manager over all these old fellas that was old enough to be my grandpa, my great-grandpa, I guess, some of them. And a couple of them, you know, approached my father and told him he was making a mistake. He said, this boy, he said, he'll never amount to nothing. All he wants to do is, he can't wait to get off of work to go chase the women in the evening and shoot pool and get in fights and get drunk and all that stuff. Well, you know what? They were right, because I was doing that at that time. I wasn't married, just like a young person. I was trying to have fun, and that's what you did for fun. You chased the women, and you drink a few beers and shoot some pool. You get a fist fight nowadays. You don't get hit a few times to make you feel like you're a hell of a man. You know?
I guess I started building nets when I was about 15. Started building cast nets and shrimp trawls, gill nets, seines, and I've pretty much been doing it my whole life.
My godfather was a master net maker, and he taught me how to make nets from sort of the ground up. All the implements that you make a net with, the spacer, the needle, those were all, when I was a kid, they were made out of bamboo, and I was taught how to make all that first.
I'm a commercial fisherman full-time, probably about the last 20 years now, but I grew up in and around the seafood business, and just making your own nets and your own crab traps and repairing your own nets, that's just something that you have to pick up just to save some money, you know, basically out of necessity.